Hello and welcome to Comedy in a Nutshell, the podcast about comedy with me, your host, Mark DeCano. Every episode I come up with something witty and pithy to throw in at the beginning, and that's become my increasingly difficult cross to bear. Why would I even include that in the format every time? Who knows? Still, comedy. It's good, isn't it? I love talking to the people in comedy about comedy. And if you like to hear what they have to say as much as I do, then please like, subscribe, rate, review and share the podcast. Thank you. My guest this episode is a comedian still in his 20s, but with a varied cultural and vocational background, has more than enough material to call on, and a wealth of experience on the comedy circuit. He traverses the spectrum from socio-political satire to physical buffoonery, gaining laughs at every turn. It's stand-up comedian Philipp Kostelecky. So tell me about how comedy sort of came into your life. Was it part of growing up? Was it family life? Was it on the television?
How did comedy come into my life? What a fun way to frame the question. I saw it. I've always been a comedian. I've always thought of making people laugh. No, nothing like that. I guess about quite a question is how stand-up came into my life, because I watched kind of comedy growing up on TV. There was like. I'll just explain for anybody listening. And so my mom is Slovenian American and my dad was Austrian. And so I was raised in mainly Austria at the start, and then we moved to Slovenia. And we would watch like Austrian comedy shows or German comedy shows on TV. So that's kind of the first stuff that I started watching. There's people like Mensch Markus, who obviously nobody listening would have any idea what. And then there was this show called Bülle vom Tölz, which was a crime show that had like quite a lot of humor in it. And then there were these Austrian and German chat shows. I'd say talk shows, but you'd say chat shows that I used to watch. So that's how I never thought about that much, but I sort of had the comedy kind of adjacent in that way. But the first time I watched proper stand-up and like thought, oh, this is wild, this is incredible, was when we were in Slovenia, and they would do these, they're called Comedy Central Presents. It was this show from like the noughties in the States. And Slovenia is not a large enough country to produce a lot of original comedy because it's only 2 million people. There's not a big audience for it. Mm-hmm. And so on Comedy Central, they would just play reruns of these shows like 10 years afterwards, and with Slovenian subtitles and stuff. Although I was raised speaking German and English, I don't speak Slovenian super well, so it was actually just watching the stand-up in English, and I just sort of saw it and on TV after school. It was just like, I don't know, probably a lot of comedians have this moment where it's like, oh, that's it, oh, that's what I've been looking for my whole life. And it was just so magical to watch it. And I think that's kind of how it entered into my life. And then I used to watch these specials kind of back to back for like 3 hours when I came home from school. I'd have it on in the background. I'd be playing video games and have them on, or I'd sit and watch them. A lot of times I'd watch them again because it was reruns of the show. Like they would just play endless reruns of the same stuff. And so that's how that kind of came into my life. And then I also started watching The Daily Show and the Colbert Report. But what was interesting was they were on a 2-week delay from the States because they had to subtitle them. Right. And so I would always start talking to my mom about like political events that happened 2 weeks ago. So I had this sort of like 2-week backdated knowledge on American politics, but I used to watch those religiously. I just sort of thought they were both incredible. I preferred The Daily Show over the Colbert Report only because I think it was a bit more accessible and I didn't sort of get what Stephen Colbert was doing. But yeah, that's kind of really those. Just like I was lucky, I had a TV in my room, so I just watched it endlessly. It was like this one of those big box TVs, But it was that's really how it kind of entered my life. And I just sort of, I think for me, it was the first time I had seen people share a weird concept or an idea that maybe I related to, and then to get an audience to understand it by having it be funny. I thought that was the magic for me, is like all these weird thoughts, all these weird ideas I've had. I was able to see somebody get those across and be liked for it. I thought that was the magic for me. And just to feel like, that's how it entered my life.
Was that the inspiration that made you want to be a comedian, to be able to put your ideas across?
I think as soon as I saw that, I thought, this is what I want to do. I was like, 100%. This is it.
So what was that? What was your opening into comedy then?
As in, when did I start?
To put it another way, yeah.
You have very nice ways of phrasing things.
I'm trying to sound more intelligent than I am.
No, I think, I like great stuff like that. It reminds me of, I don't know, have you seen the film Singing in the Rain?
Of course, yeah.
So one of my all-time favorite films, I think, is almost the perfect film, if not the perfect film. But there's a great line in it when Don Lockwood and there's he's on the tram car and he jumps into Kathy's car and he's sitting there for a while and she's driving the big fake wheel like this and he says to her, "I'd love to know whose hospitality I'm enjoying." Which is such a wonderful way to say, "What's your name?"
Yeah.
I just thought so. You're doing a lot of these type of questions, which I absolutely love. So when I was in Slovenia, I knew that when I was going to study in the UK, I wanted to do stand up here, and so I kind of had my first run in with like a comedic performance when we had this lecturer at our university who didn't show up
Mm.
one week and we all really didn't like her, and so it was like a 150 seat lecture theater, so I just went to the front of the class because there was no communication on what we do.
Mm.
So I just went to the front of the class and I just started like making fun of her and like riffing on all these jokes that we knew. So she always did the Pacific specific
I
thing.
hate that.
So we made fun of that a little bit. I even threw in some of my own material there, and it did well. I got an applause at the end of it. People were like, "Oh!" And that was kind of the first real step into it. But then what was interesting was a week later, I booked an actual gig at a pub like so I studied at Royal Holloway in Egham.
Mm.
So I just did it there, and I had a really good run of gigs, not run of gigs, a run of jokes on that set, and then I ended on this joke my brother thought was really funny about going to a Parmesan factory. He said, "Oh, this is funny, man. This is it," on like a school trip, and it didn't get any laughs. So I had like a really like I ended on my worst joke, which I it's a tradition I've kept to this day. I don't want to have it be that way. So that's how I kind of got into it. And then I started doing it a bit at university
Mm.
over the 3 years. Not a lot, though, not very seriously. But then probably started gigging in September 2018 when I moved to London.
Mm.
And I just love it. I just think it's incredible.
So what was your first sort of paying gig, your first professional booking?
First professional gig. So technically my first ever paid gig was the Drunken Heckle show in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
I got paid a whole £5. Actually, I think I might have those £5 here. I have them in a. Let me see if I can find it. It's a bit complicated to find. But I got paid the £5 in coins.
Yeah.
So it really did not have the glam. It's not like I could. I don't know if you've seen SpongeBob, but like the crab has his first dollar bill he ever made. He has it like behind a glass frame. I can't do that with my £5. So that was the first one. But I think trying to think of like the real proper professional gig. I can't remember. I can't remember which one that was. They all just sort of blend into one when you're at this stage. But certainly I had like I remember sort of the first time I did gigs like Top Secret, or I did like an out of town gig, or I was doing like a 20-minute spot. That was for sure. I mean, actually, the first ever proper paid gig, I actually got shortchanged on because they accidentally booked two openers. I'm not going to mention the booker because it would be unprofessional to do so, but they booked two opening acts at this random gig in this small town, and the other act was like, I mean, he was like, I'm not. It's £50 as well, and they gave me 20. And he said, "Oh, I'm not. They booked two of us, but I'm not. I deserve the cash." He basically stood his ground, and I didn't.
Right.
And then the booker was like, "I'm really sorry about that. I'll get you some more gigs." And then he never did.
Yeah.
So that was my first experience with the professional world of comedy.
Yeah. Welcome to the circuit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that much different.
Yeah.
I joked about the last joke not landing. This is not too dissimilar to how it feels sometimes comedy wise getting screwed over.
Yeah. What about when you started those initial gigs? What about nerves and anxiety? Was it everything that you expected it to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I wasn't really nervous for my first gig because I was like 17,
Yeah.
So I had that kind of youthful,
Annoyingly confident.
Dude, yeah, I'm confident, I'm king of the world. I had that going for me.
Yeah.
But I think weirdly enough, as the gigs started to get more important, that's when the nerves started to kick in for sure.
Right.
I get really annoying nerves in that my stomach feels really upset.
Right.
And so, but I don't have anything to release.
Yeah.
Like, I've got stomach block basically, and I get incredibly cold. which is just the worst. So I'm just sitting there pacing. I pace as well. So you have this guy pacing, holding his stomach, like shivering. It was just the worst combination of things. But I've gotten better at dealing with it. I think as my career has progressed and I've had more avenues to do gigs with, and started to perform at, that has kind of like lessened the nerves, because it means that not every gig is so important.
Yeah.
And it makes us take a step back and go, I can actually enjoy this for what it is. It doesn't always work out that way though, because there are still times where I get in my head. And that's the only thing. It's about getting out of your head and thinking, this doesn't matter. Like, yes, this is important and it has value, but it's better to perform this like it doesn't matter than it does.
Yeah.
In the calmest sense, not in the apathetic sense.
Yes. You said there a little bit about the reality of the comedy circuit. Was there anything else that sort of surprised you about what it meant to be doing professional comedy?
Yeah, I think what surprised me is how that when like it feels, especially starting out, the biggest obstacle is really getting in. I kind of feel like comedy sometimes is kind of like, it's kind of like Harvard University. Like the difficult part is getting in. Not that I've been to Harvard, but that's just what I've heard. It's like, but once you're there, you realize there's a lot more flexibility and there's a lot more easy to move around. People, they don't get rid of people that often. You know, you have to be like horrendously bad or say something, you know, have sort of, you know, views that are like incredibly unfavorable. And by that, I mean literally incredibly unfavorable.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised some people's opinions that people just go, he's funny though, you know, and you're like, all right, yes. You know. So I think that was one of the things that surprised me a little bit, is how, that route to access. And also, I think two things surprised me, in weirdly enough, in different ways. How much is not in your control as a comedian, that there are certain things that you just can't enter because there are certain barriers in place. Either, you know, you need an agent, or you need to be, you know, you need someone to approve you, you need luck, that same thing. But then on the flip side of that, how much is in your control as a comedian, I think really surprised me, because, you know, if I get annoyed that I'm not being booked here, I'm not gigging here, and then you sort of think, well, just put on your own show. Like that's what I've been doing with this work in progress shows, is I just put them on myself. And then, so for London is nice because I live here and I gig here often. I have a bit of a following here, people who will come buy tickets. But like out of town gigs, you know, I'm doing a gig in Manchester. I just put up a Facebook ad for it, and it's like sold a few tickets off of the Facebook ad. Like there's so much power and control you have as a comedian, that if no one's booking you, just put on your own shows, put up a Facebook ad and start, you know, living it up.
Yeah. Given that that's not, you know, a huge PR exercise, if you go to a room with a small group, how does that affect your performance? I mean, obviously you feel better if the room is packed, but if you've only got a few people, do you cancel? Do you perform it more intimately?
No. You never cancel. You never cancel.
Well, you say that.
Oh no. So I think I'd say five is the bare minimum.
Right.
And you can't have it be five people, the same group. That makes it tricky.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like a work in progress show. Like if I was, you know, if I was doing something bigger, more important. Yeah, I think for me at this stage of my career, if I was doing like a work in progress show and I had five people in the audience, I would still do it, because it's part of it is just rehearsing it and getting the material out.
Yeah.
And often with five people, as long as you go at the top and you say, hey, look, this is going to be the gig. It's going to be weird. It's going to be this. This is how it works. And then just do the material and just try it out. And often with those gigs, because you have to try so much harder, you can pull material out of it that you wouldn't before.
Yeah.
That being said, a packed room is way better. And a packed room that's really up for it is way better, because you take creative risks that you wouldn't normally, and you can get a lot more. Yeah, I think sometimes you can get more like fun ideas in a bigger room, but you can start to feel more realistic in a smaller room, because you have to talk. You can't be huge energy and like this big stature. There's five people in the room. So you take a calmer approach, and that can be quite good as well, for just sort of like slowly talking the way into the bits and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers that question.
Yeah. So, I mean, this year you're doing the full Edinburgh run, as we say. You're not new to Edinburgh experience. You've done split bills there before.
Yeah, so I did a split last year, and I did what's called AAA, which is a showcase show.
Yeah. I mean, what was that festival experience like of doing the full run at Edinburgh?
It was great. Yeah, I think, I don't know, people always, when I tell friends I'm doing the Fringe, and they're like, are you going there for the full month? And I'm like, yeah, and like performing every day. And I was like, yeah. They're like, oh, wow, that's like, ooh, that's gonna be so challenging, and you're gonna be so tired. And it's like, yeah, I guess, but there was one time I was at the Fringe and last year, and I was talking to a security guard, and it was it was like 4 o'clock, and I said, "Oh, how you doing? What's happening?" I like to talk to the layman. That's me. That's
Man of the
I'm a
people.
man of the people, as they say. I'm up there on stage, and you might think this guy doesn't connect with the everyday person, but he does. He really does. And I was talking to him, and I said, "Oh, how's the day going? What time do you finish?" And he said, "Oh, I finish at 5." And I said, "Oh, you only got half an hour left then?" He said, "No, 5 a.m." And I was like, "Oh, like all these like pathetic little artists, and
Yeah.
creative people coming from this and doing 1 hour a day's work." And I'm like, this guy's up till 5 a.m. and he's gonna have to deal with the most horrendous people until 5 a.m. These just like drunk, tourists and stuff like this. So it just kind of stuff like that puts it in perspective where you think, yeah, it's tiring, it's exhausting, but you're doing what you love. And I
Mm.
think that's for me is so much calmer. I think only this year I'm a bit nervous because I'm going to be working my day job and I'll be gigging and I'll be doing 2 shows. So I'm doing like I've got reduced hours, so I'm doing 9 to 3,
Mhm.
and then at 4 p.m. is my hour show. Then I have a bit of a break, and then at 10:50 is my like compilation show, my late night show,
Mm.
which is just for a bit of fun. But the hour one is what I'm really trying to get people to come to.
Yeah.
So that I think will be quite draining because I'll be done at 11:50 in bed by like 12:30, up again in the morning, catch up on sleep. But I'm not going to drink for the festival, so that'll help as well.
Mm. So when you were deciding to be a comedian, did you know what kind of comedian it was that you wanted to be? Did you have a style in mind?
I guess sort of, and I know this is going to sound very arrogant, but I don't think I decided. It just felt like what I had to do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounded incredibly arrogant. I'm sorry. It sounded like I didn't decide. The world chose for me to be. Um, so, or it's like Harry Potter, the wand chooses the wizard. When I decided, because obviously it is still a decision.
Mm.
Even if you feel it isn't. No, I never thought about that, and that's something that I think as I've started to get a bit more relaxed and stuff on stage, I've started to think about it. No, it just kind of falls into it. I think a lot of it comes from early influences as well. The type of comedians you watch starting
Mm.
out and the type of comedy you like to watch, those will affect the type of comedian you are. I've sort of, I've kind of changed a little bit. I started off mainly doing kind of observational comedy with a bit of like a high status element to it
Yeah.
and like hiding behind that. But as I've gotten more comfortable, I've now recently, in the past year or so, started to introduce a lot more physicality into it, make it a lot more silly, be a little bit more emotionally open,
Hmm.
but only in a way that kind of is self-deprecating, if anything.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the type of comedian I wanted to be was just funny and myself. I think that makes sense. I looked up to people like Bill Burr, Louis C.K., Dave Chappelle, that kind of like observational American relaxed style.
Mm.
Bill Burr in particular, I think recently has just kind of like I'm just rewatching it. It's just on a completely different level than almost anything else. But what happened then is I started to watch Sebastian Maniscalco, who's a really physical comedian. I started to get into, watching some of the more British Edinburgh type of shows, which
Mm.
goes, okay, it's not 100% my style, but I see that there is a benefit to opening up a little bit and letting that barrier through
Mm.
um, ever so slightly. So I think that kind of has informed the type of comedian I want to be now, which is, I think it's a balance between sort of observational comedy, social political commentary, physicality, kind of silliness, it's
Mm.
kind of like an intersection of a lot of different worlds. The one
Yeah.
thing I haven't really been able to do is become like a storytelling comedian. I found it very difficult to tell stories on stage. I will
Right.
tell like loose stories that just lead to an observation, but I've never been able to tell like a full story back to front.
Yeah. And how much is what we see on stage representative of you yourself?
I think more and more each day, way more of me is coming out on stage, which is why I'm having more fun with it. Sort of
Mm.
voices, characters, silliness. That is
Yeah.
something that I've kind of like, and what I call basically kind of humor through like the only word I can think of is like cuteness, if that makes sense. Not that I think I'm cute on stage, but of course I do a little bit, but I think it's more like, when like a kid is sad, it's
Mm.
funny, kind of like when a kid is sad over something insignificant, and but it means so much to them, like when a
Yeah.
kid is sad about something and it's like, this doesn't matter, but the fact that it means so much to you is funny, and like, and you just go, oh, there's, I'm trying to create some jokes where you kind of feel bad for me but also laugh at me for it, because it's the emotional openness.
Yeah.
Someone being completely honest is always going to be funny. So I think a lot more of me is coming out on stage than had been previously. And I think, yeah, I think, you know what, really, who I am on stage, I think, is the person I wish I could be all the time, um, in different aspects.
Right.
Sort of, either in that I wish I could be more silly and more physical in my real life, but I just don't always feel like I have the energy for it. I wish I could, share my thoughts and my feelings all the time, but it's not always appropriate for it. So I think it's who I'd want to be.
Yeah.
Not always, because you don't want to be talking at that projection level, all the time. But yeah, I think that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about having started your career and you're winning the gong shows, you're doing all the circuit. Then 2020 rolls around. What was your reaction, response? What was your situation when comedy closed down?
Comedy closed down. Well, I was in a weird stage where I kind of was sort of starting to make some inroads, but also I think looking back on it, they were just sort of maybe dead ends. How did I feel about it? Well, it was just sort of, I don't know. I don't know if you feel this way. Do you ever feel like that those 2 years are almost like a 1 second? They don't even feel like they happened.
Yeah, but I'm an old man. That's like every day to me.
Yeah. How did I feel about it? I think I was upset because I had some stuff in the works and I was getting excited and I was feeling more comfortable on stage.
Yeah.
I regret not using that time to kind of do like online content. That's one of the biggest regrets I have about the 2 years, is not sort of getting into sketches and stuff like this.
Right.
But it's also, I was really stressed because I didn't have a consistent job. I got a really bad furlough because I had two jobs and I left one of them in February. So by the time March kicked up, I wasn't able to get furlough on both of them. So I just spent a lot of it just kind of stressed and bored. And I picked up some skills though, and I started working on like personal stuff, watched movies with friends, but did a lot of like, I think I sort of just accepted that it wasn't going to happen, and I just let it be, and I just sort of, as pretentious as this sounds, worked on myself, just sort of realizing who I was as a person. So yeah, it certainly was difficult, but I kind of came out of it with a better, like. It's sort of because I think in comedy, because a decent amount of people left, there was like a gap, and everyone kind of stepped up a little bit in some ways if you were in the right place at the right time. But yeah, certainly I felt like I kind of gave me some time off to think about stuff, which I enjoyed.
Yeah. Did you find it easy to get back into again?
Yeah. After a break, I've always found it easy to get back into stand-up. I cannot express how much I love doing it. Like it is just the most fun I can have, and it just feels like I was watching do you know Hercules, the 1997 animated film?
Yeah, the Disney film.
Disney one, yeah.
Yeah.
There's the song he sings, "Go the Distance," which is all about when he's like, I'm on my way, I will go the distance. I'll find out where I belong. I mean, I listen to that, and maybe arrogantly so. He talks about basically all the crowds cheering for him, and he'll find his place where there's a great big welcome waiting for him and stuff. And he's like, that's where he belongs. And so that's how I feel like when I'm on stage. I'm like, yes, this is it. And I'm trying to have more moments where I like think for a second, this is incredible that I'm here, and I just this is exactly what I want to be doing, like all my life if I can.
Yeah. So I mentioned gong shows and such, but also last year you were finalist in Leicester Square New Comedian of the Year, and the previous year you won at Southend. How do you feel about competitions? How do you feel about those kinds of accolades?
That's interesting. Yeah. Competition gigs are interesting because I find them quite challenging because my actual, like, the comedy I like to do isn't just what does well in competitions is usually having a character, whether that character be based off of like a personality trait. A lot of the times, and I don't think I'm being insensitive by saying this, a lot of times these characters are based around social political identities, sort of sort of saying, I am this person from this group, and here are like 5 jokes about that, and then maybe one joke not about that to kind of mix it up.
Yeah.
And those work well because it's an easily definable thing we can find on stage. So I've always found those difficult because of that, because I haven't felt that I've been able to sort of market myself as, I'm the guy who's like a bit sleepy, or I'm the guy who's whatever weird trait you can kind of find for yourself. Yeah, they're challenging gigs, but they can be really fun. And to win it feels good. Like it does feel great, especially the South End one, South End New Comedian of the Year. When I won that felt pretty good. Yeah, it also, the Leicester Square one was particularly nice because it was just such a lovely stage to perform on, and I think I just prefer big stages where you can walk around. And I was really happy with how confident I was on that stage and how controlled I was. I kind of regret one of the jokes I did. I should have changed it for a different one. But yeah, they can also be tough. I've done a few competitions so far where I sort of felt that I've performed really well and I've done really well, and like haven't gotten placed on the podium or haven't won it. And I sort of, that can be quite challenging mentally, because you sort of think, am I delusional? Am I not thinking this? Because I heard the laughs myself, and I felt it in the room. So that can be a tough thing. But I also think one of the benefits I've had doing competitions is a lot of the times, because of this idea I've talked about, like branching out and having my finger in so many different pies. Like I do shows in Europe.
Yeah.
I gig in clubs a lot. I do all these stuff that when I've done competition gigs, I've made it to the final and I haven't won. All I've thought is, well, tomorrow I'm doing the Comedy Store, or in 2 weeks time, I'll be gigging my hour show in Europe. So it doesn't matter, this kind of stuff. So they can be fun.
Yeah.
But I think this will be the last year I do them. I'm probably going to submit for the BBC New Comedian of the Year competition, and then that'll be that. I'm never going to do them again. I just don't. I don't feel the need to. I'm really content with where I am.
Yeah. You said there about gigging in Europe, and obviously with your what you said earlier about watching American comedy and so on. How do you find comedy changes culturally as you travel around?
I think funny is funny. Like if it's funny, if it's properly funny, people will like it. How does it change culturally? I don't know. That's a good question. I've found my experience so far to be like a lot of stuff I write it with the intention of it being internationally accessible. One of my biggest gripes with the some of the stuff I see here in the UK, especially these Edinburgh Fringe shows, I just watch them and I just think I have no idea what the hell these people are talking about. I'm really not sure who the Chuckle Brothers are at this point, but I know one of them is dead. But I have no inroad here, and I find that as an audience sometimes quite isolating. In that this is a show that everyone's praising. I have no idea what anyone's talking about, or I get some of the jokes. I've lived here long enough to get some of them, but I just sort of feel isolated, and I think I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel like I don't, belong listening to this show, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So I've always written, not always, but I think I made a conscious decision around September last year to go, okay, this is all going to be internationally accessible, even if it's not like everyone's taste. I want no one to be there thinking, oh, I can't understand this. I think that's also where the physicality has come into my act, because, it's like in Europe, a lot of times you get, like, when you do these English speaking shows, you get a few different types of audience members. You get people who are learning English and come to the shows to learn English. That's a decent group of people. Expats who like grew up in international schools or just like work in an English speaking world. And then you get like couples whose mutual language is English, and so they go to these shows. And then you just get, Americans or British or Australians living abroad who are just curious about this. So you get that nice mix of people, often hugely different culturally. Sort of, when I was in Amsterdam, I had like people from like, Venezuela, Colombia in the show. And then I had people from, Uganda, Japan, and all these kind of stuff. You have all these people, but they all speak English, and it's kind of that joining thing. And then they can all watch the show. And it's really nice to see a group of people like who would never have met or never been in the same room if not for coming to see my show and making them laugh. And so I think that's what I find. That's where I find there is like, people get it, that people understand it, and it's just to see the excitement. And I'm sorry, it's just to finish off the point about the physicality is that if someone doesn't speak English super well, if I explain like a basic concept in a few words, they get it. And then to throw in a huge act out, it's like, oh, everyone can understand this.
Yeah.
So that's why that's why Mr. Bean was so popular. So the physicality for me is something I really enjoy doing. But then there's also that added benefit of like, I know it'll elevate this joke because everyone's going to get it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what I also think is good about adding this kind of layer or trying to write internationally is that I think if you write, even if you're gigging in the UK a lot, if you write more British-based jokes, you'll be pretty certain that like 70% of the audience, almost always 70% of the audience will get it.
Yeah.
But if you do skew it and try to make even the same joke work, could be the same premise, it just needs to be amplified to be international. You're now going to then start hitting that 80, that 90% mark of the audience who don't understand it but can get on board with it. And I think that for me is much more exciting.
Do you feel like, I mean, from my observation, sometimes comedians who aren't specifically doing it, like what you said there, you said about doing a physical action to emphasize a point you're trying to make.
Yeah.
I see a lot of comedians who are trying to be energetic by, making a lot of physical motion, but actually it becomes more distracting and it takes you away from the point. How do you decide how much or how little to put into a routine?
I talked to my shaman and we decided together. No, I'm joking. How do I decide? I think it just what feels right to me. I like pacing, so I'm always going to be moving around a little bit when I'm on stage. But to sort of get into a physical bit, that's a good question. I never know. It just sort of feels right to me.
Do you video it and watch it back to see how much you're moving or not moving?
Yeah. Yeah. Sort of, to watch and see. And also sometimes I watch it and I think, oh, this isn't enough. Like I could go so much bigger with this.
Yeah.
Like I think you saw the show. I have this whole bit where I sort of pretend to be a lizard, a human in lizard skin sort of thing. And I watched that back a few times and I thought, I'm not going hard enough on this. Like I could be so much more of a lizard while I do this.
Yeah.
And it would work so much better. So yeah, I think it's sort of, how do you decide though? I don't know. I don't think I make a sort of a conscious decision. It just sort of feels like that's what it needs to be. Like it feels like the right choice.
All right.
But I get your point about it being distracting. Sometimes people like do prance around on stage, or they're just so erratic that you're like, I can't. You dude, relax.
Yeah.
Chris Rock said the reason he paced around on stage so much is because he's like, if you're walking, they'll pay attention to you. Like if you're moving, they'll have to pay attention to you. So there's kind of that double-edged sword of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers.
I should emphasize that I didn't feel that you did too much or too little in your show. But what my point is, how do you know to get that right as you did?
Yeah, I don't know. You just like it, you just feel it. But that being said, there was one point where I did the lizard thing for like a fifth time, and I was like, all right, these people are bored of it. Like it's not interesting for them anymore. So that's one of the biggest. You can feel people go like, well, I guess the biggest thing is if they're not laughing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think when you add physicality, it should, because it's often so exciting and surprising, and it requires less thinking time, and it's more just immediately stimulating to the brain.
Right.
I feel like when I get physical, the laughs I get are different. I can feel there's a certain heat to that laughter, or there's certain energy to that laughter,
right,
which I know is different. And I can, in the second it stops being that way, I'm like, okay, this is no longer, this is over the top now.
Huh. I never thought about there being different kinds of laughter for different kinds of comedy.
Yeah, I definitely feel like when you get physical, for me at least, maybe I'm not a good enough joke writer or storyteller to get laughs otherwise. But I know that when I get physical, like there's a certain, especially when that physicality is paired with ludicrousy.
Right.
If that makes any sense. Like if you're doing something so physical, but that's so insane and ridiculous, like there's just a certain like guttural laughter that comes from that, because combining that with relatability, that people will it's just like they can't help but find this insane and funny and fun to watch.
So you mentioned that you ran your own comedy night in London. What's the difference for you being in command of a night, emceeing, as opposed to being an act?
Yes, so I will say I no longer run a night. I will be running a show in Edinburgh though, so that I've done before. So that's Philipp and Friends spelled with a PH, so pretty clever.
Yep.
So running a night is different. It's way more. There's a difference, I think, between running a night and emceeing a night. Running a night is stressful because it's sort of getting the admin done, making sure the acts show up on time, paying them, and then making sure there's ticket sales and stuff like that. MCing is sort of it can be tricky because it feels like a lot of the weight's on your shoulders, but it really isn't, because
Right.
if the acts are good, it should be easier for an MC to do it. I think MCing can be really, really fun. I remember last year when I did AAA, so this showcase, I was hosting it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the biggest reasons that I started to get more physical in my act, was because I think the only way you can host a show well or MC a show is by being yourself. You can't host it the way another person would host it, because it just feels really disingenuous.
Mm.
And you're not going to have fun. The whole point of the host is to be somebody that the audience goes on stage, sees them come back up, and they go, "Oh, this guy's going to be fun. This person's going to be fun. We're going to have a good time with them."
Yeah.
I don't think you should be challenging the audience. I don't know. I don't think personally, if you got like edgier stuff or stuff that splits a room, I don't think that's necessarily appropriate as the MC, because you don't want to take that risk unless you can pull yourself out of it.
Yeah.
I just talking to people is just fun. Like when you get people who say like the most ridiculous stuff, or you get these insane answers and you play off of it. One of the biggest things I think is important to do as an MC as well is always look at the person you're talking to. This is a real frustration of mine when I see people host shows and they look at the person, they say something funny, then they turn to the whole audience and do like an act out or a joke, and then they go back to the person. I think you ruined it, because the magic is almost that the audience is watching you interact with another human being.
Yeah.
And that's the magic there. And how you're playing off of them, making fun of them, but also having them included. Then maybe they snap back at you as well. So for me, emceeing and hosting and crowd work and that kind of stuff, that's where there's a magic to that I think is just incredible. So I've always really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
It helps when you have acts that are good as well, because I've hosted like open mic nights and stuff, and it's really tough to pull that energy back into it.
Yeah.
Or it's even tougher in that if you're having a really good time, that I've been at shows where the MC has been way better than the acts, and I've thought I'd rather not see any of these people. I kind of just want to see you, and so it's finding that balance.
Yeah,
it's really fun. Hosting a show is great. It's where you also learn like a lot of crowd work, and you also learn to be calm and perform with nothing, like just to walk on stage and be able to do that. So that's why I found really good about AAA last year. Is I was able to I hosted for 20 minutes and I didn't have anything. And I also realized while I was hosting that when I tried to do jokes, they weren't working as well. And then I told this to a friend of mine, and he said, maybe it's because the way you're hosting is the way you actually should be performing, and you need to start making sure your jokes are like that. And then that's when the physicality came into a lot more, because when I would hosting and stuff, people would say stuff, and I would they'd say something weird, and I would do a full like act out of the person that they've just described. And like I could feel people liked it, because people were looking, someone being, like I said, someone being themselves and someone being honest is always going to be funny to people.
Yeah.
So someone looking at that and going, "Oh, this person's really being themselves." I feel like I'm being very arrogant on this podcast talking about how amazing. But I also think it's more personally how I feel about it. It's just like, that was a big shift in my confidence and my general performance style, is when I started to integrate who I am as a person more onto stage.
So those kind of challenges of being an MC, when you juxtapose against a prepared material from your act, I mean, what position are you actually more comfortable in?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think I'm more, maybe I'm more comfortable as an MC, because I think people are really fun to talk to, and I think so many people are really funny and interesting.
Right.
But I find, I think I'm more comfortable maybe as an MC in some cases, but I want to be seen as an act, if that makes sense. I want to be seen as somebody who does the material and stuff like that. Like that feels it feels more academic. It feels more refined. It feels like there's a certain like air to it where you're like, this is okay. Like it's amazing to be able to improvise and get a really great joke out of it. But for someone to see something and go, this person has polished this to the point where it feels like they're emceeing.
Right.
That's for me is more exciting. It's a challenge. So I prefer the challenge of an hour, which is why I prefer it. So I prefer the challenge of material.
Yeah. So what about, let's get to the meat and potatoes. What's been your best and worst gigs so far?
Best and worst gigs. Best one. I did a gig. We'll start optimistic. I did a gig a few months ago in Horsham,
Yeah.
which is just southwest of London, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably one of my favorite gigs I've done. It was at the Capitol Theatre. Uh, and it was this like it was just this incredible room where it started really low and then it just shot up high really quickly. Like it wasn't a very deep audience,
Yeah.
but they were just really high up, and almost all of them were in like pitch black, which can be a really nice feeling as a comedian because you're not looking at them, you're just hearing them.
Yeah.
And that's a much better gauge of how to feel a room, because sometimes, and also they feel more comfortable to laugh because they're in the darkness.
Yeah.
And then it was a huge stage as well. And it just sort of, I did that gig and I just thought this is it sort of felt like, yeah, this is the kind of stage I should be performing on. This has felt comfortable to me. This has felt, as Hercules said, this is where I belong, So things like that I think about. I had one I did last year or so, which was in Croydon, which was a really fun gig. I had this bit that I had this kind of ending to, and it really landed and it really worked.
Mm.
I've done a couple of gigs at Top Secret that have been like pretty wild times. So there's like certain ones that I'm like, oh, these were really, really fun gigs. I'm really happy with how I performed, the choices I made there,
Yeah.
and how I let stuff breathe. So those are good. Worst gigs, there's not enough to choose from. Definitely that one where I got shortchanged. That was
Yeah.
bitter. It was, the gig itself wasn't good, but I also felt so taken advantage of,
Right.
and it really that kind of added some hurt. I did King Gong, which is this gong style show. I don't know if your listeners know, but essentially you perform 5 minutes. You get 5 minutes, but doesn't mean you perform 5 minutes. The
Mm.
audience can boo you off at any point by putting up 3 cards. And the first time I did that, I stuttered. And they booed, and I said, "Oh, was it so bad that I stuttered?" And they were just like, "Fuck off!" And then I was there with my friends were there to see me, and it was just I was felt so destroyed on the inside. And I remember going home and just curling up in a ball of like just thinking it's never gonna happen. You're never gonna you're never gonna be on Comedy in a Nutshell. Like it's not gonna work out for you. I'm teasing, of course. No, but that was a bad one because of the sort of mental strain I felt afterwards. So that was bad. And then I did this one called Rudy Liquid's 5 Minutes to Shine,
Yeah.
which was a competition gig. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And so it was a gig that I wasn't experienced enough for. There was a DJ on stage. I just really fluffed it. Steve Bennett, the Chortle reviewer, was in as well. And the first line of his review was, Kostelecky bombed hard and he knew it. And it was all pretty much downhill from there. I just felt so out of place, and like I was just not strong enough as a performer. So those are some bad ones. Or the worst ones are where you like travel like hours and hours and it's like 3 people and they don't give a shit about you and you're like, oh, great. So those are some of the worst ones for sure.
Yeah.
I wish I had a really funny, bad like story gig, like a funny one, but they're all just they're just character building.
You will.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure.
So, do you have any particular? We've talked about the things that you learned from those experiences. Do you have any particular philosophies that you take forward with you?
Oh, philosophies. Ooh, that's a good question. I think one of them for sure is, if you're talking to an audience member, look them in the eyes. I think that's probably one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, philosophy. Oh, that's a good question. Any philosophies and stuff I think about? Um, you know, Trying to find a positive route out of like a crowd interaction. I think maybe they're more crowd-based stuff, but like if someone's heckling you, you you don't have to tell them to fuck off. You can see if you can understate it. I think there's a lot to be said about understated comedy. I'm finding people like that. There's this guy Robin Granger who's based in Edinburgh,
Mm-hmm.
who I don't know if you know, he last year he only had one audience member show up to his Fringe show, and it happened to be like a new like a BBC producer who then told Kate Copstick, works at the Scotsman, who then made it like a tweet, and then he sold out his run and it became like the #3 BBC news story in the world.
Oh yeah.
So he does like a 20-minute club set about that. Basically a 20-minute club set about how he wasn't a success. And I love that kind of stuff where people take a really understated approach, but then we come to the end of this story and he's our hero, he's our champion throughout.
Yeah.
So he's great. Eleanor Tiernan, I like that stuff as well. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just bigging up other people rather than thinking about philosophies. Staying calm, I think, is one of the biggest things, and realizing it doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
if you fail, you'll get another try at stuff. Like, and it's just meant to be fun. I think that's the biggest thing. Is it's meant to be fun, and I think one of the biggest things I try to do is, and I don't know if I achieve this all the time, but I try to be like at least somewhat original, or at least a little bit refreshing with my act. I try to do stuff that I don't think I've seen before. I don't try to do too much hack stuff or like really like pull back and reveals. A couple of them for a bit of fun, and it can be good ways to get through bits.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's try to add something to the world of comedy rather than just do what everyone else is doing. That's kind of my biggest.
Yeah.
Those are my mottos.
So what are you adding? Tell us about your Edinburgh show.
What am I adding? Oh man, that was smooth. That was very good. That was like a radio presenter kind of introduction. What am I adding to the world? Oh, that's really gonna have to. We're really gonna get a lot of cockiness and arrogance out of this one. Well, my show is called Daddy's Home. It's on every day at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival at 4 p.m. at the Stand too, except for the 14th of August. I think what I'm trying to do with the show. First of all, I just want it to be a really funny hour of stand-up. Like, it's not got it's not got like this serious moment. I sort of tried one at the preview you saw, and as I did it, I just thought, I just don't care. I think I just don't care about saying this serious stuff, and I don't actually think it's a message I want to say. I'm going to try in the next few previews to sort of basically kind of talk about, like, the first part, talk about maybe the sadness and the kind of the pain that I felt when my father left and then my father died, but all in a funny way. And then I think if there's going to be a serious moment, I think it's just going to be dedicated to how much I love my mother, and that's going to be the only narrative arc I think I'm going to present in this show, is shifting like the sadness from my father into the love for my mother, if that makes any sense. Which sounds very sweet, but and also very progressive of me, I think. What do I want to say? What am I offering in this show that I think is a little bit different? I think it's a really fun balance of like physicality. Obviously, you could agree with this, or you can be like, wow, this guy's delusional if he thinks he's offering. I think it's a really fun balance of physicality, kind of fun joke premises that are kind of stupid, but also like make sense. There's a bit of a cultural, countercultural vibe to it as well at points, or like at least social political commentary on it. And then I think the main thing I kind of do is trying to have trying to open up a little bit emotionally, but having a lot of fun doing it, and creating a fun environment for people to come into and be like, all right, there's some stuff I can relate to. I'm trying to go for like core relatability in that, the feeling of loneliness at times, missing somebody, but also trying to spin positive into negatives. I think that's what I'm trying to go for in this hour. It's just a really relatable show, but that has got proper jokes to it, proper club style comedy within it, but isn't so far that direction that you lose the sense that like there's a bit of heart here and there's a person underneath it all.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? Do you think the show is aiming to do that?
It's not the show I saw. No,
wow, the show, yeah.
No, absolutely. And what about the other show? What about Philipp and Friends? So this is affiliated with your excellent podcast, of course.
Oh, yes, of course it does. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Philipp and Friends, a late night comedy show. That's just going to be it's going to be a fun time. It's literally just, I think the tagline for it is like, it's late night, so anything goes. It's just, I'm going to have acts there.
Yeah.
I'm just working on, either working on jokes or just that. It's like cheap tickets to get in. People can buy them in advance for like £12 if they want, but just show up on the door and just pay £5. It's really just, it's just for me to like cut loose, just chat to an audience, get people riled up, get them excited, bring a couple acts on. It's like whatever happens. I have no preconceptions about what I want it to be. I just want it to be it's gonna be a fun time, I think. So come along. It's just me hosting, chatting to people. That room where it's in City Cafe. It's in one of the smaller rooms, 30-seater.
Tiny little. Yeah.
That's just like everyone's so exposed and open. but I've had some of the most fun gigs in those rooms because they're literally just like, it's such amateur comedy. It's such like, it's so not professional, but it does work because they're like karaoke booths. So it's like, you know what it is? It's a completely unprofessional room, but it's professionally soundproofed. And so it works. There's no distractions from the outside. You can really get into the show. And so it's like, and those rooms for me are great. So I think that's going to be really fun. But I think the hour for me will be the most rewarding because it'll be a really chance for me to kind of showcase what I think is all of my potential.
So how can we find out about you? How can we find out where you're performing?
I am on social media. On Instagram at Phil Comedy. If you want to follow me. If you don't want to follow me, it's still at Phil Comedy. It's a little joke you guys there. That one's free. So it's at Phil Comedy on Instagram and TikTok, and then on Twitter it's at Cheesecake PCK, which I wanted it to be Phil Comedy, but there's currently a guy who has Phil Comedy, but his account is banned, so the name is just gone. And also I had tweet last year and a tweet this year that kind of did well, and I don't want to change the handle because I still get followers from that occasionally. This is just completely irrelevant to the question you asked, but that's why it's different. So and then also you can find me on my website, philippkostelecky.com. Philip is spelled P-H-I. I mean, just look in the description. I'm not going to spell it out. I was going to spell out Philip, and then I realized they're going to look for Kostelecky, and that's going to be even harder. So there, and then you can sign up to my mailing list. It's all of these funnel into my Linktree, which is just Linktree/Phil Comedy, and that's the easiest way to find out all this kind of stuff. So I'm performing. I don't know when this comes out, but I'm doing a London date on the 19th, and I'm doing Manchester on the 23rd of July, and then Liverpool on the 30th of Manchester on the 23rd, Liverpool on the 30th, and then August 2nd to that. And then I also, by the time this comes out, this will actually be a good time to plug this. I'm recording the show on the 19th of October at West End Comedy Club. And so I think that'll be the best time to go see it because I'll have had like a month away. I'm going to the States for a month to gig out there and like get a bit more of that in US international feel to it. And it'll be like, I think it'll be the best the show is going to be because it's going to be like, have that month off from Edinburgh to really calm down, think about what I want to do. And then just, I think hopefully in the States, it'll get the material really tight. So 19th of October, if you can't make it to anything else, come to that. It's West End Comedy Club. Tickets will be available pretty soon.
Excellent. So finally then, Philip, can you please sum up for me what is comedy in a nutshell?
Oh, shit. I didn't realize that was all leading to this. I should have. Comedy in a nutshell for me, it's joy and it's a release. It's just not having to worry and it's the perfect balance between challenging our thoughts and setting ourselves free from them.
Very nicely put. Thank you so much. It's been really great having you to talk to. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this as well. I think you're a very good interviewer. I found you have like a really fun way of asking questions and stuff. So I really enjoyed this.
Good. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much.